This is Roger Schupp. He has studied at Central Missouri State and has a doctorate at the University of Texas in Austin. Percussion. He has performed a lot. Is part of the jazz ensemble. Um, let's see, has performed uh, with a lot of different artists in terms of commercial. I don't know if you want to mention who some of the people are or whatever, but he's done a lot of different performing in a lot of different areas. So he comes with a wealth of experience and background perspectives. So I thought this would be something you would be very interested in, and I know he's kind of excited about talking about things today, and I'm looking forward to it too.
Well, let me say first of all, this is one of my soapboxes, because I don't think that performers spend enough time in analysis trying to figure out what their piece really is. I have students in particular who will go into the practice room with a new piece of music, and for us especially, it's difficult because we're not in contact with the instrument. The closest we generally get to an instrument is about 12 inches, the length of the mallet, and for the instrument's sake, that's probably safer. So consequently, what the students end up doing, they end up playing a line 10 times and then end up looking at the instrument because they have it memorized by that point. So they're never really figuring out what's going on. So when Dr. Trantham gave me the little handout sheet to say what a lot of the people have been doing in here, I decided I would take it literal and go through it point by point and tell you what I do. And that's what this handout sheet is about. So I'll read portions of the handout, and then I want to interpolate a little bit and tell you some more things that I do. Why use analysis and how? That's the first little subheading in his handout to me. Why use it? Well, when learning a new work, a lot of performers waste incredible amounts of their practice time hashing and rehashing through notes that they have no understanding of. I mean, how many people go into the practice room and let's say you have a piece of saxophone literature you're working on. You've never played the E-bar. And you go in and you learn 4 bars of the E-bar, and you go back and you play those 4 bars. And you know what all the notes are, but not really how they relate to one another or which note is important. You know, not every note on a piece of paper is as important as the note that precedes or follows. Okay? Analysis provides the performer with, one, a recognition of the key centers and the harmonic progressions of the piece that they're playing. One of the first things that I have my students do, and I'll tell you more about it when we get to this, first thing we do is look at first note of the piece, the last note of the first section, first note of the next section, the last note of that section, first note of the next. So I'm trying to identify what the key of this piece is. Is it really in the key of C, like this one looks like it is? In this particular instance, it is. But is it really? A lot of composers now, with the pieces that they write key neutral clef. They don't put a key signature at the beginning of it, and the key is determined by accidentals. So only through going through the piece and finding out what's there do you really find out what the key of the piece is. 2, an understanding of primary and secondary thematic materials. Okay, you want to hear primary thematic material? Come down this afternoon at 5 o'clock when we're rehearsing the Creston Marimba Concerto with the band. There is primary rhythmic thematic material, primary melodic thematic material. And then there are the little secondary things. And when I'm playing a primary theme, the orchestra may be playing, or the band in this case, may be playing the secondary theme. And they work together. And if I don't know what they're doing, and they don't know what I'm doing, it's not going to work. It's not going to fit together. There's no way. Analysis provides me with that. I go through my part and I go through theirs to find out what I'm doing and what they're doing with it. The opportunity to identify phrases and articulations. And this is what I was talking about with my students who go in and play note, 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 note. Okay, I've got all of those notes. I've got those 10 notes down. Now I'm going to go back and play it again, see if I can play it better. But there's no phrase to it, and there's no sense of articulation. Don't let me forget to sum all this up when I get to the end of this section, because there's a real important point I want to make. The ability to recognize form and structure before practice of the instrument begins. Does that make sense to everyone? These are a lot of things that you've already talked about in here before. Every performer comes in and says the same thing. Okay. The luxury of working out fingerings, or in my case, stickings, before approaching the instrument. I'm sure Simone sits in front of the TV without her flute, with her music, doing this. It's like, okay, that's how that fingering goes. You probably do the same thing, Dan. And you do it subconsciously. Walking down the hall, and you're thinking about the Nielsen flute concerto. And there's a, you think of a really hard section, and your fingers, whether they're moving or not, your mind is sending the impulse to your finger to say, this is how that's going to go. And then suddenly you stumble upon a clear thought that says, oh, that would be easier if I did that this way. Okay? That's what all this preparation does for you. Analysis, this is C. Analysis allows me as a faculty member to have a greater understanding of the music my students are going to play, even if the student is playing a work that's not in my repertoire. If they come in with a new piece and say, for my lesson this week, I want to play Merlin by Andy Thomas. My comment is, go make me a copy and get it here this afternoon because your lesson is on Friday, and I need a day to go through this piece and see what's there, so I'm not learning the piece 2 days behind you. Now, here's my summation. My method of practice, 30% of my practice time is done away from the instrument. And I consider analysis practice, because I'm learning things there that I won't learn when I'm standing in front of a marimba, looking up, looking down, looking up, looking down. It enables me to learn things in bulk instead of saying, okay, G, A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G. I say, oh, G Lydian. I've got a G Lydian scale when I get to this point. Boom. I don't have to think about it. I just play a G Lydian scale. So that's one longer phrase that I can look down at the instrument and not be looking up to make sure I'm playing every note that's up there. And this works for all of you, whether you're voice, piano, woodwind, brass, whatever you play, strings. Learning to recognize things in bigger bulk will help, 1, your reading, 2, your performance, because you're playing a greater length of phrase rather than note to note. Your articulation, you can decide what point of the phrase needs to be articulated stronger. Dynamics, all kinds of things, just by looking at bigger bulk. Okay? We'll go through all this, and then I'll guide you through how I do this. Then you can ask all the questions you want, or simply send me on my way. How and why performance influences analysis? Okay. Dr. Trantham may jump me on this one. Since music is largely an oral medium, sometimes paper and pencil analysis aren't enough. The simple act of playing the music must tell you in which direction the piece is to go. I may look at a piece of music and say, okay, this is what it is. This is how this is going to sound. But then I get it on the instrument, and it sounds completely different. Because the oral creation is different than what I see here. I may not be thinking as I'm analyzing a piece that this note sounds louder on the instrument than that one does. This portion of the range on the instrument naturally pops out more. It's going to make it sound different. So, in my discipline, this equates to which particular instrument is appropriate for a piece. Let's say I'm working on a multiple percussion piece. I may set up the drums that I think are right, and they're not. The analysis tells me that this is what I should use, but when I actually play it, it's not right. Which mallets, what tempo, is the tempo that the composer gives me an approximation, or is it really the tempo? And how many and how my my personality influences the performance. I will not sound the same playing the Creston Marimba Concerto as Evelyn Glennie. Evelyn is about half my size and deaf, so her approach to playing is going to be different than mine. All right. How and why are insights gained through analysis conveyed to an audience? Dr. Trent and I talked about this earlier. I'm going to read through this whole thing, and then I just want to see what your response is. The bottom line in any performance is that the performer must relate to the audience his or her feelings toward, that should be not an understanding of a piece of music. This in the hopes that the audience will be moved emotionally. A lack of understanding of the piece being performed will ultimately result in an unsatisfying performance. When performing, our job, in part, is like that of a tour guide. We take the listener on a musical journey in the hopes that they will find particular enjoyment at various locations along the way. Now, look at my two little subheadings here, A and B. Using this analogy of the tour guide.
Dr. Moss isn't in here yet.
No, not yet.
You want us to come in or wait or?
Okay, you have, you can come on in, I guess, and sit there. Because he'll be here in just a minute.
Okay. Now,
Welcome.
All right,
Dr. Moss will be up.
Thank you.
we'll talk in a moment.
Using this analogy of the tour guide, imagine that you go on a trip with a tour guide who can't read a map and has no idea what points along the way are of interest. This will undoubtedly lead to an unfulfilling trip. Now, visualize a performance where the performer had not analyzed the music with the intent of identifying musical destinations and points of particular interest. It's the same thing as going on a trip with a tour guide who doesn't tell you where the important parts are. Does that make sense to everybody? How many of you have thought of that already?
I discussed it a little bit.
Yeah. How many of you apply it to your practice? You should. I mean, I'm sure that you all do because you're graduate students and you have wonderful cognition already, or you wouldn't be here. Okay. How does analysis assist me when I learn a new composition? We've already talked a little bit about that. I think you can read these things on your own. It helps me to learn the composition faster. It helps me to pick the right instruments, decide on stickings and phrasings before I get to the instrument. And certainly there are millions of other things that we could talk about, but there's only 15 or 20 minutes, right? Questions about any of that?
What's your theory background? Have you done a lot of study of theory, or is this just something that you as a performer decided was really important?
Well, both. I have no degrees in theory. I took a number of theory courses as an undergrad, and I took a number of theory courses as a graduate student. As a master's, my master's is strictly in classical performance, but my doctorate is in jazz studies, percussion, performance, jazz emphasis. And as a jazz musician, analysis is imperative. If you're going to improvise, you have to know what notes work correctly with the chord. You have to be able to identify large structures. You have to know, when you're improvising, which note resolves best to the next chord. For instance, if I'm playing what they call rhythm changes, which is the chord progression to I've got rhythm, I have to know how the thirds and sevenths move through the progression, because those are the tendency tones. They define the quality of the chord, and they define how my resolutions occur from chord to chord. So from that standpoint, yeah, I do have a lot of theory background. And what I do with my students is that I find out what semester of theory and oral training they're in. And we begin the process of doing what they're going to do in the next semester, that semester. So that by the time they get to theory, they already understand what's going on. So we're always one step ahead of the game. Now, they don't always put it into practice when they go into class, but I think some of them do pretty well.
Yeah.
Some of the guys are really strong with that. As far as timpani, oral skills is incredibly important. So the theory, I cannot personally imagine being a musician and not having an understanding of theory and analysis. My performances are going to be so bland, and the way I play has a tendency to be a little bit too emotional sometimes anyway, because I get carried away with this is the important part. People have to know this is important. You know, I get carried away with it that way. So yeah, other questions about what we got here? Okay.
I was just going to toss in one. Is there, following up on what Simone said, is there a specific pattern or approach that you use when you say, okay, I'm going to study a piece? This is what I do first, or do you look at the piece and say, okay, this piece has this type of character, etc., so you begin to develop your analytical approach to the piece based on this character of the piece, or do you say, okay, I've got to look at the harmony first, I've got to look at the theme first, is there a set way that you look at the music?
No, there's not a set way I look at them, because every piece is different. If I'm playing a Bach transcription, let's say I'm playing something from one of the cello suites on marimba, I'm going to have a pretty good idea of what the harmonic structure of the piece is going to be before I even sit down to play it, just from years of analysis in theory classes. So I'm probably not going to go through and look at the harmony of that. If I'm playing something that's more 20th century, I'll probably sit down and try to figure out harmonically what's going on and try to find thematic material so that I won't have to go through the entire piece and analyze the whole thing. I might analyze this chunk and say, okay, that happens again here in a different key center, so I know when I get there, it's going to be the same thing but in a different key. And rhythmic structure, I'll look for that. And I tend to, when I analyze things, I structuralize a lot. I don't do Schenkerian analysis or anything like that, but I'll take them down to a smaller thing and say, this goes here, down through here, which is kind of a jazz approach. These 4 bars are in this key. These 4 bars, while it's still in B flat, are not rhythm. You know, rhythm changes has that progression in the beginning on the 17th bar. That's a cycle of dominant 7th chords, 2 bars each. So I'll go through and say, okay, I know when I get there that even though this is a dominant chord, I'm probably not going to play mixolydian scales. I'm going to go back and just apply the key and work off of the 3rd and 7th to make things sound interesting, so I can resolve to the next chord and make it sound interesting. So there's no set way for me.
This may be a real ambiguous question, but when you're performing with the sextet, you have so many options available to you when you're performing, because you have all those different drums and instruments at your disposal. How do you go about fitting in percussion? Or just analyzing what they're doing and then using your oral skills and then coming out? Because I listen to you guys playing, it's always changing. There's always something new that you know, whether it's ride someone here, I'm going to do this, I'm going to express something.
Well, with the guys in the sextet, this is the luxury of having a stable sextet that I play with day in and day out, every week, 52 weeks a year. And of course we gig a lot away from the school as well. I know Chris Bazzelli's sound. It doesn't matter what guitar Chris picks up, it's going to have pretty much the same sound, because that's his approach. I know which of my cymbals sounds good with Chris. I know that Jeff Halsey does not like me to play brushes on his solo, because he thinks more like a horn player. He plays bass like a jazz saxophonist. And so he doesn't want that stirring sound behind it. I know when Russ Schmidt plays a solo that he's going to start playing rhythmic figures that go over the bar. And they may go over the bar for several bars. We may be in 4/4 time, and Russ is playing something in 5/8. So I have to work what I play rhythmically to coordinate with what Russ is doing in his solo. You have to be careful, because sometimes you get into what they call chasing the soloist, and it sounds better if they're playing 5/8 against your steady 4/4. It sets up a tension that needs to be there. It's kind of like Stravinsky. You know, somebody's playing the bass in Rite of Spring, the bass drum and cymbal passage. She's just going on and on and on, playing the same thing over and over, and doesn't particularly line up with what the woodwinds are doing. And if it did, or if the woodwinds lined up with the bass drum, why not write it in the other time signature? It sounds better like this. So all of those things influence. And I don't think I'm rare as a drummer, as a drum set player. You know, I'm not saying that that's all I do, but in that when the guys are soloing, if they start using alternate changes, that influences how I play, because it implies a completely different thing. If they start doing a chromatic walk down thing over the blues, then I know this has a whole different nature than 1-4-1-1-4-4, 1-6-2-5, 1-6-2-5. You know, those progressions. So, and this is an interesting thing about jazz musicians. Jazz musicians, unlike classical soloists, identify tunes by their chord progression. If you ask someone, you know, hey, what's this? Beep ba bum ba bum ba. Everybody goes beep. They all know from the melody. Jazz musicians, if you go on stage with them and say, what do you want to play? Oh, let's play this tune. I really don't know that. Oh, it's rhythm changes, but instead on the bridge it does this. They identify themselves with theory. And I think that really came about from the era of Charlie Parker's and Dizzy Gillespie's and Miles Davis and these guys that, were always striving to take it this much harder and really take it away from the general audience and put it to the musician. It's like, we're going to give this to you so you can have something. You can really sit back and go, oh man, what are they doing? Oh, that's cool. And jazz musicians also are some of the most amazing orally trained individuals. If you were at Easy Street last night, we were playing with the vocal jazz group, and they come up with all these great standards, but don't do them in the standard key. So they want to do nice work if you can get it, but they want to do nice work if you can get it in G instead of E flat. Well, Chris just says, okay, no problem. And Jeff, I don't really know this, but I'll get it after the first chorus. And after the first chorus, he's got it. He's fine. And he'll know it forever now. So